Hi guys, I'm Zeal. Welcome to my Final Fantasy XIV Heavens on High Bestiary guide. In this guide, I'll be talking about every notable mob in Heavens on High, and I'll give some tips and tricks on how to deal with them on every class. Here are some of my notable Heavens on High achievements to give some credibility to my guide. Before we start talking about the mob, let's first go over a few mechanics that are very important in Heavens on High. Let's start with the most important mechanic of them all, line of sighting over short LOS. This is a mechanic that you must learn to get through Heavens on High, and the more you know, the better you will be at dealing with mobs. This is the means to get out of a mob's sight, and it helps you to dodge many mechanics. As for the second mechanic, we have kiting, which is a more well-known mechanic. It's the means to damage an opponent while walking away. This is going to be very helpful in the dungeon overall. Not only will you be doing this constantly on ranged DPS and whenever you can on casters, but it can also be very helpful to do so on melee ops or even on tanks to gain some distance, gain some HP back, and avoid a little bit of damage. One more thing to keep in mind is that when mobs are casting, they will continue their auto attack, so it's important to go behind them. There's also one more bonus side: if you do go behind them, you will delay their next auto attack because they need to turn around to hit you, which delays their auto attack by a few seconds. Now to go over the last mechanic, if you get out of their auto attack range as they are about to hit you with their auto attack, they will be staggered into place, and which seemingly looks like as if they are stunned, which delays even more damage. Now without further ado, let's get to the mob. Let's start off with the Shark mob. Here we use a cast called Jaws. This will hit you for around 1/3 of your HP at level 60. Just like all the other mobs before floor 50, this will die really fast, so you don't have to worry too much about this. Here we have the Amakiri. He will do a cast called Shock, which will hit you for around 1/3 of HP, will knock you back, and applies a 30-second dodge that hurts. Here we have the Heavily Hand. He will use double auto attacks called Fluid Strike. Up to 30 seconds it will cast Wash Away. This will knock you back and will deal massive damage. However, you can interrupt and stun this. Just be a bit careful when you pull this guy in a big multi-pull. As you can see here, even with steel being up, I still take massive damage, so be very careful with non-tank jobs. Here are a few big pulls you can do on tank. It's pretty much very fine for you to pull entire floors from floor 1 all the way to floor 50 on the tank and on healers. However, on healers, I do recommend popping a steel if you want to do very big pulls. But as long as you mitigate properly and heal properly, you will be mostly fine. Lower floors are also a good way to practice mind plays. As you can see, I'm doing one on a healer. These are a very helpful place to help you later down the line to make your clears more consistent and easier. And the same counts for tanks. Here we have the Harakiri mob. It will enrage after around 25 seconds into the fight, or once below 50% HP. You can stun and interrupt its cast, and you can also outrange or line of sight it. Here we have the Onmitsu. It will do the same thing as the Harakiri mob, however it will only cast its enrage once below 50% HP. Here we have the Sekibon. It will cast 2 frontal line AoEs, and after around 20 seconds into the fight, he will cast Trampoline Epic Grab, which is a big AoE that deals massive damage. However, you can interrupt and LOS this. Here we have the Worm. It will enrage after 30 seconds, sucking you in, stunning you for 5 seconds, and hitting you for massive damage. Here we have the floor 50 Bosu boss. It will start with a frontal non-telegraphed cleave. After that, it will cast a non-telegraphed line AoE. Then he will do an eye look away mechanic. If you do look into the eye, you will get confused for a very long time and you will not be able to resolve the next mechanic. Lastly, the boss will cast a proximity AoE with some orbs that will spawn randomly around the arena. These orbs will explode at the same time as the proximity goes off, and then they will explode after that 3 more times until they disappear. The boss will from now on just repeats its mechanics and will do so until it dies. Here we have the Naga, and soon into the pull it will cast a frontal eye look away mechanic, so just get behind it and you will be fine. Soon after that it will cast Baleful War, which is a big hitting AoE. You can interrupt, stun and LOS this. Here we have the Tokage. It will give itself a physical damage buff for 30 seconds, and immediately after that it will cast a melee ranged AoE. Don't worry too much about this buff, as it will only slightly buff its DPS. Here we have the Kaminari, which puts a vulnerability stack on you with each auto attack it does. Don't worry too much about these stacks, even at 5 stack it doesn't do that much extra damage. Here we have the Kamakiri mob, which makes use of double auto attacks, and this will put a 30-second dot on you. Here we have the Kongorai mob. It makes use of all attacks that are ranged, however you cannot line of sight these. It will also cast line AoEs, and after doing this 3 times or after 50 seconds it will enrage, teleport you and deal massive damage. As you can see here, you will still die to enrage even with steel up, so unless you're a tank with steel you will not survive this. Here we have the Tetsu Kyojin. All of his casts are quite fast and all of them deal massive damage, so make sure you do dodge them. The first one is a fast line AoE and the second one is a fast puddle cast. Here we have the Marushi. All it does is cast white line AoEs. If you do get hit by this you will take massive damage, and unless you're a tank you will die. Here we have the Tesso. Very soon into the pearl it will use a double auto attack which will put a 30-second dot to you, and immediately after it will cast a frontal cleave. Here you have the Dokyu. Just like the Tetsu Patrol, it makes use of very fast casts, of which the first one is a frontal cleave, and after that he will throw a very big puddle on the player. Make sure you don't greet this and get out of it in time. Here we have the Karakuri mob. All it does is auto attacks and nothing else. Here we have the Rachi mob, which is the hardest mob of this set. He will hit you with double auto attacks, of which both of them are ranged. You cannot line of sight these, and this mob cannot be afflicted by anything. No stun, no snare, no sleep, nothing. Out of combat, when you are within a certain range, he will go after you until you are in sight and hit you with missile. Here we have the Baby Shapti. All he does is a frontal cleave cast and auto attacks. Here we have the Gohan mob. He will do a cast that pulls you towards him and he will hit you with a double auto attack. You can interrupt, stun and line of sight this. Here are a few big pulls you can do as a healer in this set. There are plenty of double pulls you can do without steel, and with steel you can do really big pulls, especially if you know which mobs are the easy ones. A good route to follow for big pulls is if 1, if they have annoying cast, maybe it's not good to pull them in the pull, and then 2, if they do double auto attacks, maybe you need to watch out with how many mobs are going to pull. Here we have the floor 60 boss. He will start off with a frontal cleave. Then 2 sets of 3 staffs will spawn randomly around the arena and they will cast a donut AoE around them. You can either step inside of them or outrange them. Then the stats will cast a line AoE targeting the player in 2 sets. Meanwhile the boss will cast a melee ranged AoE around him. This set of staff spawns will always spawn the same way. They will all cast a donut AoE, and the safe spot for this is always behind the staff. Be careful, the boss will cast a puddle onto the play, so first bait this away before you go to the safe spot. Lastly, the boss will cast an AoE that does a little bit of damage onto the player. At the end of this cast, all the staffs will cast their line AoE onto the player. By simply moving left or right from the safe spot that you were on, you will dodge these. There's another safe spot for this mechanic by standing in the middle. To dodge the line AoE, simply walk between 2 staffs. After that, the boss will repeat the fight. We immediately start off with the hardest mob of the set, the Onryo. Soon into the pull, he will use a double auto attack that puts a 50-second dot on you that really hurts. Immediately after that, he will cast a frontal cleave. Immediately after the frontal cleave, he will hit you with a double auto attack. 5 seconds later he will do so again. All of this together with the dot taking hurts really badly and makes him very dangerous. However, it is normal to do this mob without commanders and you need to mitigate quickly to do so, but for first timers I do highly recommend use a steel until you get used to this mob. Especially for casters is this mob incredibly dangerous. He can put you from 100% to 0 very fast, so it's important you avoid damage as much as possible and abuse sleep when needed. Another important thing to mention is that it's really important to keep your regen potion rolling and only fight when you have a lot of mitigations and your burst ready. As for tanks, this guy isn't too bad to fight, just like many other mobs. As long as you mitigate properly, you will be fine. One last thing to mention is that the moment he wants to put a dot on you and you have a shield up and the shield will not be broken, the dot will not be applied. On another note, when you are comfortable fighting him, you don't need that much mitigation and burst to actually fight him. I also like to mention that on ranged DPS he really isn't too bad to fight as long as you make use of sprint and heavy. Here we have the Wakakusa, which puts a stacking dot on you with each auto attack he does with a max stacks of 8. Once you reach 8 stacks, it will deal around 50% of your max HP with each server tick. Be careful that the dot does last for 30 seconds, so any mob you will fight after this guy will become very dangerous. Here we have the Yoboko Patrol, which is a very easy mob. All he does is a frontal cleave cast, and when mobs are close by he will cast Stone Skin on them, which will shoot them for around 3k damage. Here we have the Manenso, which makes use of double auto attack, which hits pretty hard, and then puts a stacking vulnerability debuff on you that lasts 10 seconds. The longer this fight takes, the more dangerous he will become. Here we have the Mimic of the 61 set. This one doesn't hurt too much yet, as long as you hit a little bit, well, you'll be fine. Next up is the Iwamushi. This is an incredibly easy mob. All he does is just auto attacks and he will cast a melee ranged AoE, which just gives you some room to just damage him and heal up if needed. And even if you do get hit by the melee ranged AoE, it really does no damage. Here we have the Moro Patrol, a very easy mob. All he does is a melee ranged AoE and a targeted puddle cast on the player. He's very easy because he does a lot of casts, so he almost never hits you with auto attacks. Here we have the Jellyfish mob, another one to add to the easy power of mobs in this set. All it does are line cast AoEs, which are pretty fast, so do be careful with that, because it does deal a lot of damage if you do get hit by it, and some auto attacks in between. Here we have the Dokuzari. He makes use of ranged auto attacks, which you cannot line of sight, and he will use melee ranged auto attacks. And if you get close to him, he will cast a melee ranged cleave. Now be careful, because if you do get close to him, he will hit you with both auto attacks. So do be very careful with that. A way to deal with this is by DPSing him with 1 GCD, and while that's on cooldown you go away and just only get hit by the ranged attack and then go back and forth to avoid as much damage as possible. Of course on ranged jobs, this mob is incredibly easy. Here we have the Koso Dekai. All it does are auto attacks and it casts its frontal cleave. Here we have the Hashiri, which soon after being killed will cast a donut AoE. You can line of sight this if needed. Soon after that she will cast an eye look away mechanic. If you do get hit with this, you will get one shot and die. Immediately after that cast she will cast an AoE, which is very fast, but don't worry, it doesn't do a lot of damage and you can line of sight it. Here we have the Shitaibana, which is the second hardest mob of this set. He makes use of a non-telegraph frontal double auto attack, so you can line of sight this. And a bit into the fight, he will use a non-telegraph melee range attack that puts a dot on you, which hurts quite a bit. Immediately after putting that dot on, he will do another double auto attack, which you can again line of sight. Same for the dots, you can also line of sight that. However, it is not required to line of sight these to be able to fight him, so don't worry too much about it, it just makes it easy. Here we have the Peng Ho, another easy mob which will cast a big portal onto the player, and other than that he will just use auto attacks. Here you have the Shisakura, which is the last mob of this set, another easy one. All he does is a frontal cleave attack, and soon after that he will cast a puddle at the player's location. Lastly, here we have some big healer pulls you can do, with the first one being a big pull without commanders, and the second one a big pull with steel, pulling quite some dangerous mobs with you. Keep in mind that you definitely do not have to pull as much as I do, you don't need it to clear this set in time, so even if you pull only 2 mobs at a time, it's still okay. And here another one showcasing a big pull without commanders. Here we have the Kenko, also known as Cerberus by the community. You will start off with a non-telegraphed frontal cleave. Soon after that it will cast a telegraphed puddle onto you. The puddle is quite big and the cast is also very fast, so make sure you get out of it in time and don't breathe inside of it. Then the boss will cast an undodgeable puddle at you, which will deal damage and will leave behind a puddle on the ground. After that the boss will cast an AoE, which doesn't deal a lot of damage. Now you're going to need the puddle that got left behind on the ground, because the boss is now going to cast Hounds Out of Hell, which is a targeted, undodgeable line AoE. This will stun you in place. Now you want to be standing in the portal before the end of the cast of Hounds Out of Hell. You'll get stunned in the portal and then the boss will use Devour. If you're not in the portal by the time he uses Devour, you will die and get one-shotted. Now it is handy to know that if you have a shield up when you cast Hounds Out of Hell, you will not be stunned into place. Now this is very handy to keep uptime, but do know you do not get stunned, so when you are in the portal you need to make sure you stay in it until Devour goes off. Not Hounds Out of Hell, but Devour. Devour is the attack that one-shots you, so wait a little bit and then move out. After that the boss will just use an AoE and the fight repeats itself. We immediately start the new set off with the Mimic of this set. He's a bit more difficult than the set before, and you do need to start watching out for it when fighting it as a DPS. However, most of the time you're going to be using a Witching anyways. It has 2 uses. One, you will avoid getting the pox, and you will have an easier time dealing with it. However, if you have enough mitigations, you can deal with it quite easily. Here we have the Ichiyama, also known as the Ghost. It's not a very difficult mob, all it does is just an incredibly big AoE which can stun, interrupt and line of sight, and then it will throw a puddle at you which can also interrupt or stun. Now do know that the puddle cannot be line of sight, only the big AoE. Here we have the Nuyagi mob. All it does is auto attacks. However, don't be fooled, because if it's not doing casts, it means it's always auto attacking you, so his damage will power up. Also be careful that if you stun or put him to sleep and get behind him, he will kick you in the face and deal some extra damage to you. On top of that, he will also knock you back. Here we have the Shikubi. All it does is auto attacks and a melee ranged AoE cast. Here we have the Yoga Patrol, which has increased auto attack damage. It's only a little bit more than other mobs, so don't worry too much about it. On top of that, he does an incredibly big frontal cleave cast. You can line of sight this, or you can just dodge it normally. Immediately after that, he does an eye look away mechanic. Here we have the Okami mob. All it does is a double auto attack dot, which is enough for him to be incredibly scary and a no-go to pull. However, you can line of sight the dot. The dot lasts around 12 seconds, and every time he does try to put a dot on you, you have to wait 12 seconds for him to reapply it. So Once he does it and you do LOSs, you have to count either 4 to 5 GCDs or count to 12 and then line of sight it. If you are anything but a tank or ranged DPS, I do highly recommend you do avoid him, because if you do get hit by the dot, chances are high you will die. Also, the dot will heal the mob up, so making the fight take incredibly long, especially on healers. Here we have the Yugi Tokage. Out of combat it will cast Ice Dispenser, which is a bottle on the player. The cast is quite fast and it will one-shot you once you get hit by it, so make sure you do avoid it in time. Once in combat it will cast a frontal cleave attack, then a few auto attacks, then another frontal cleave cast, and then it will cast Ice Dispenser. Just like the Hyuga, the Yozen Patrol has increased auto attack damage. Outside of that, he does a frontal cleave cast, and that's all he does. Here we have the Mammoth Mob. Out of combat he will cast AoE attacks which will deal around 2 to 3k damage to you. Be careful, because when you are in concealment and you do get hit by these, you will be kicked out of concealment. While in combat, the Mammoth will cast a big frontal cleave. Be careful, because the telegraph marker is bigger than what it looks like. It's a scam, and if you stand anywhere in front of him you will die. So go either behind him or line of sight this. Now we're going to be dealing with the Tofu Mob. He makes use of Blizzard Cast, and when you are in melee range he will hit you with melee attacks. These Blizzard attacks can be line of sighted, and after around 3 to 4 casts he will cast Golden Tongue. Golden Tongue will give him a magical buff which increases damage by a lot. So you can either stun or interrupt this. Do be careful when you do interrupt the Golden Tongue cast, because the mob will start moving towards you, so you'll be forced to move from your current LOS position. I normally don't interrupt this cast because I don't like to relocate. Sometimes it's also not doable, and as long as you LOS properly, it's alright. Even if you get hit once or twice, if you just heal up immediately after, you'll be fine. The trick to line of sighting these casts is, if the moment you see the cast pop up, you immediately go behind the wall, and the moment it ends, you go peek out and do your GCD. Don't peek out too fast, because then you still get hit by the cast. Now we start getting to the scary mobs of the set. Here we have the Lion Patrol. He makes use of double auto attacks. After that he will do a big AoE called Cry, and immediately after that he will do another double auto attack. Be careful, these double auto attacks do hurt really badly, and I do recommend people that don't play tank and get it for the first time to use a steal until they get used to this mob. As long as you have plenty of mitigations, you'll be fine fighting him. However, it is important to learn how to fight these mobs without commanders, especially on melee and cast jobs. This is more difficult to do so, but it is very valuable to be able to do them without, as you can save steal for more important and more dangerous foes. Meanwhile, on tank, this mob is a piece of cake. Here is a POV of me fighting him on Red Mage. I know that in around 5 seconds into the fight, he will use his double auto attack and immediately go into his Cry cast. This gives me the information that he will not use any other additional auto attacks, and this will give me the room to use my sword combo and get massive damage in there. After the Cry cast, I make sure to kite him and hit him with as many instant casts as possible, and use all the OTCs I have left, and then put him to sleep with Swift cast. This gives me the time to relocate, get to position, pop my regen potion, and burst him again, in the hopes that I kill him in time before the fight gets difficult for me. We have the Yuishi mob, or also known as the Griffin. The moment you aggro him, he will cast Free Fall, which is a puddle at your location. Be careful, the cast is quite fast. Immediately after that, it will use his double auto attack, which hurts quite badly, and he will do so 2 to 3 times until the next free fall cast. After the second free fall cast, he will hit you with one more double auto attack and cast Winds of Winter. You can either stun this or line of sight this. It's a big AoE that will one-shot you if you do get hit by it. With this, do keep in mind that on casters and ranged DPS, your only option of dealing with this is to line of sight it. On melee DPS, I personally prefer to save the stun as well to avoid damage and heal up, rather than using it for Winds of Winter, and I'd rather just line of sight on melee DPS as well. Here are some POVs on other jobs. Here we have the Yuki mob, which is the last east mob of this set. He will start off with a Frozen Mist cast, which is just a very thin frontal cleave cast. As his second cast, he will either use Frozen Mist or Northern Lights. Northern Lights is a very big AoE, which you can line of sight, interrupt, or stun, or even put to sleep. Then, as his third cast, he will use whichever one he didn't use as his second cast. Lastly, here we have the Yak mob. All he does for 30 seconds long is just auto-attacking, which hurt pretty badly. And because he's so big, it makes it quite hard to kite him. And after 30 seconds, he will enrage. His enrage entails him pulling you towards him, putting a heavy on you, and then casting a big AoE that will kill you. You can interrupt this, you can put him to sleep to interrupt the cast, or you can line of sight it, and lastly, you can also just outrange it. And of course, also for this set, we have some healer pulls that you can do to try and speed up the time a bit more. Here we have Fenrir, the floor 80 boss. He will start off with a frontal cleave, and right after that he will hit you with a double auto attack. Soon after that, he will spawn ice orbs in set patterns around the arena. Then a pillar will spawn randomly on the arena and will go into random direction. Whichever orbs get hit by this pillar will explode, and if you get hit by these, you will get frozen and you will get one-shotted and die. Soon after that, the boss will cast AoE, which will explode the remaining orbs. After this phase, the boss will use another double auto attack and he will repeat his mechanics. There are many safe spots for these explosions, however, as you may have noticed, there is a number 1 mark northwest on the left side looking at the exit. This number 1 mark is always safe for all explosions, so if you are a tank or a healer, you can always just stand here, stay there for the entire fight and do nothing, and all you need to do there is touch the frontal cleave. On tanks and healers, you don't need to use steel to fight this boss. Same counts for DPS, however, it is a little bit more difficult to do so on those jobs. But if you can pull it off, it will be huge to be able to save a steal for the next set. On ranged DPS, all you need to do is kite, and it's not very difficult. However, casts and melee DPS, especially Black Mage and the melee DPS, it is quite difficult to do so. If you can pull it off, it will be a huge variable gain for yourself. Of course, do use strength or frailty if necessary to kill the boss before the time runs out. We now have arrived at the floor 81 plus set, and we immediately can start at the Mimic. This will be the last set where you can fight Mimics without Pomanders. However, even though I say that you can do them without Pomanders on DPS, it is incredibly difficult to do so and super dangerous. These mobs can hit you for over 10k with a crit, and casters have only 15k HP, so you can do the math how much it is of your max HP. Best way to deal with them on DPS is to either use a Witching, which allows you to deal with them and avoid pox. 2 is to pop a Steal, or if it's at the start of a floor, you can use a Frailty the moment they do pop up, so you can actually fight them and still have that reduced damage from the Frailty. However, on tanks and ranged DPS, he isn't that difficult at all. Especially on tanks, you just mitigate a bit properly and you'll be fine. And as a ranged DPS, you can avoid the pox no matter what, because you can interrupt him. And as long as you kite properly, you'll be fine too. Here's an example of me killing him in Witching, and after that an example of me fighting him on a Red Mage without commanders. Here we have the Mukai Inu, also known as the Chimera and Garm by the community. He makes use of Dragon's Voice, which is a donut AoE, and Ram's Voice, which is a melee ranged AoE, which you can both interrupt and line of sight. On top of that, he does a few auto casts in between. He's very easy to fight, just make sure you do dodge all of his attacks. And do be careful, because auto attacks do increase damage compared to other mobs in this set, so keep that in mind. Here we have the Gruder Patrol, which has a mechanics which you will see more often from now on. He starts off with an on-aggro dash attack, which you can line of sight as shown here in the clip. For anything that is the tank, it is highly recommended you do line of sight it, because if you don't, you get hit by the on-aggro dash and an auto attack at the same time. Now if one of these crits, you will die. After the on-aggro dash attack, he will cast a frontal cleave attack, which you can line of sight. And after that, he will cast a very big AoE, which you can also line of sight and also just outrange. However, do be careful, because the cast is quite fast. Do not greed inside of it, do not underestimate it, because it is really fast and I've gotten hit by it quite a few times. Then he will use something that we know as Tumult. He will repeatedly AoE for 6 times back to back. Don't worry too much, because these AoEs don't hurt too much. They will only hit you around 2 to 3k damage per hit, and you can line of sight these. However, do be careful, because while he's doing these AoEs, if you stand in front of him, he will hit you with auto attacks. This mob can be fought on every job without commanders. Just make sure you do mitigate and heal properly during the on-aggro dash phase. After that, he's quite easy, as he doesn't auto attack you a whole lot and is mostly just doing casts. If you time it well, you can line of sight these AoEs and damage him at the same time, as you can see here in the Machinist clip. Here you have the Matanga mob, one of the easier ones of this set. Just make sure you do line of sight on aggro dash attack. Just like the Grula, this can be very dangerous if you do not do this. After that, he does a few casts and just auto attacks, and that's it. Here we have the Gorilla Mob. Out of combat, he will spam AoEs 5 times and buff himself with a physical damage buff, which will double his damage. In combat, he makes use of double auto attacks, but these double auto attacks hurt really badly, and I only recommend fighting him without Menace on tanks and ranged DPS. And only so if you have Kiting Room on ranged DPS. On anything else but those two classes, do I recommend using a Steel or Strength and Frailty to fight him. However, on these other jobs it is possible to fight without Menace, but I only recommend when you have no other choice and you are comfortable doing so. Here we have the Gozu mob. He makes use of a non-telegraphed frontal cleave. It is incredibly big, so make sure you either go behind him or line of sight it. Then he does an eye look away mechanic, and then does another non-telegraphed frontal cleave. Be very careful. After this he will start auto-attacking you, and it's the moment that you want to be mitigating him. Here we have the Elephant mob. Out of combat he will shoot puddles at you. Make sure you do get out decent time because the casts are quite fast and will one-shot you. While in combat he will just use auto attacks and will shoot these puddles at you as well. Here we have the Ruji mob, which is a very dangerous mob to fight without commanders. He makes use of double auto attacks and a cast called Firewater, which is just him shooting a puddle at you. After this he will do 2 more double auto attacks and then he will cast Firewater again. However, what makes it possible to fight this mob without commanders is that whenever he's casting Firewater and you stand behind him, he will cast Elbow Drop, which is a cleave behind him, which will stun you and do massive damage. But by abusing this, you can force him to do the elbow drop cast, dodge it, and do a little bit of damage. This way you avoid auto attack damage. You can do the same thing with a stun. So after Firewater, you go behind him, bait elbow drop, then wait for the double auto attack, wait 1 more auto attack and then stun him, and then go behind him again and then bait out the elbow drop again. Do be careful that you cannot chain the elbow drop cast, so you cannot do Firewater, elbow drop, bait, and then stun him and then elbow drop bait again. You have to wait because elbow drop does have a cooldown on it. As mentioned before, I do not recommend fighting this mob without commanders unless you are comfortable doing so and you have no other choice. Otherwise, I just recommend fighting him with a Steel or Strength and Frailty. On ranged DPS he's quite comfortable, however. I do have to mention one more thing, that if he does his double auto attack and one of them do crit or even both, then he will get one-shotted as anything but a tank. After this Red Mage PvP, there will also be a PvP of me showcasing him fighting him on a ranged job. For this mob, I'll be using the recording from my stream to explain the mob.
This is a double auto attack. Mitigate it properly. Boom, big damage. Then he's gonna do a frontal cleave. He's gonna do another dot over here. Make sure you mitigate it properly so you don't get to redot. Interrupt this. You won't interrupt this on a melee, otherwise you're gonna get auto attacked and get a ranged attack on you, which is really bad. You get double damage then. Mitigate now again. Okay, and we're gonna run out of mitigations from now after this. Okay, now we cannot interrupt this, so we're gonna use Heart of Light to mitigate it a little bit. And you also get a dot from this, right? And if you stay close, during the cast, you can also get auto attacks. Here, as you can see, auto attacks there. So battle will be legendary. Let's go. Yeah, it is good to do. Don't interrupt that, by the way.
At the end of this POV, I tried to line of sight the ranged attack, but you cannot do this. You can only outrange it or interrupt the ranged attack. Despite me finding the Sensei without the steal in this and in the next POV, I highly do not recommend to never do this. This is just something to do for fun and just to challenge yourself. You have to fight this mob with a steal or strength and fruit, and even then it's quite dangerous. So I always recommend using a steal if you fight on anything but a tank. Here we have the Hitotsume, or as I like to call him, the Cyclops. He's very easy mob because he does a lot of casts. The first cast he does is called Glower, which is a non-telegraphed line AoE. Then he does another cast called 100-ton Swing, which is a non-telegraphed big AoE around him. You can line of sight both of these attacks. Here we have the Manticore, which makes use of an unaggro dash attack. Immediately after, he will give himself a physical damage buff that increases his auto attack damage by 50%. After that, he will do a few casts. If you are far away, he will cast Fireball, and if you are close by, he will do a non-telegraphed frontal cleave. After 30 seconds, he will get a physical damage down debuff, lowering his damage by 50%. So during this period, he becomes incredibly easy. So as long as you survive the first 30 seconds, the 30 seconds after, he will become completely useless and harmless. Here's a POV of me fighting him on Red Mage under Gloom and Blind. However, it is very dangerous to do this because the unaggro dash attack can one-shot me under Gloom even though I line of sight it. Now in this POV I try to make use of the fact that after 30 seconds his damage will be lowered by 50% of his original auto attack damage, and in this period I can DPS him and actually fight him under these conditions. Here we have the Koki mob, one of the easiest mobs of this set. He will do a donut AoE, and then he will cast a frontal cleave that's very long. You can line of sight both of these. And after those casts, after the frontal cleave, you have to wait 5 seconds or around 1 to 2 auto attacks. And then he will do an AoE which puts a vulnerability stack on you for 30 seconds. Now, even if you do get this and not line of sight this, don't worry, the damage won't be increased by that much. Here we have the Anko mob, another very dangerous mob that you need to avoid. It works exactly the same as the Rujin, aside from the fact that you can abuse elbow drop. Anko does not use elbow drop once you get behind him, so all it does is just double auto attacks and then a melee ranged AoE. Just to mention, you have to fight this mob with a steal, especially in Gloom. Steal is a must. Unless you're a tank, I do not recommend fighting this mob without a steal or strength and fealty. If you somehow have not killed him after 1 whole minute, then he will soften rage, cast flags and give himself a physical damage profile. This will double his damage and most surely one-shot you. One last thing to mention again, if he does double auto attack crit you, you are dead. Lastly, here we have the Aragi mob, or also known as the Gobu mob. He can either be very comfortable or very hard for you to fight, depending on how correctly you can LOS him. 4 seconds into the pull or after 1 auto attack, he will cast Gobu's Creep. This is an AoE which puts a stacking dot on you, which hurts quite a bit. Now, instead of reacting to this cast, it's better to just know when he does it, because it's almost impossible to react to the cast because it's incredibly fast. So if I tell you, after 4 seconds after 1 auto attack, he does it. The moment that happens, you just go behind the wall and you automatically dodge the AoE. Now, a rule to follow is, after every cast he does, he's gonna cast Gobu's Creep again. So he's going to cast a Powder on you, then Gobu's Creep, then he's going to pull you towards him and do a frontal cleave cast. Be careful, just like the Mammoth telegraphed frontal cleave, this cleave is bigger than what it looks like, so go behind him, otherwise you will die. Then he's gonna cast Gobu's Creep again. Now, he's not going to do any cast, he's going to hit you with 2 auto attacks and then use Gobu Creep again, and then he will repeat his rotation. And here are a few healer pulls you can do in this set. Here we have the 490 boss Onura. This boss really isn't all too difficult, and it's actually easier than Fenrir to do without commanders. This boss is divided in 2 phases. Part 1 is fighting him from 100% to 85%, and in this phase all he does is he will start off with a melee ranged AoE around him, then he will cast a line AoE at you, then he will cast a puddle on you. Once you have reached 85% of his HP, put him towards the east side. There are many strategies for the upcoming mechanics, but this is the strategy I use for every job. I put Waymarks down to showcase where we need to go to for the upcoming mechanics. In this case, 1 is on the east side, so we're going to put him to 1 over there. And he's going to cast Ancient Quaker. This will deal 50% of your max HP. It doesn't matter which mitigation you have up, you will always hit 50% of your max HP unless you have a shield up. Then orbs will spawn in set patterns around the arena. But we don't really look at these, the only one we care about is the one that spawns on 1. It will always spawn on 1, except for the 3rd and 7th pattern. So, once this spawns, you go to 2 and start baiting the boss over there. By the time the boss has reached your location, he will start casting Meteor Impact, which is a proximity AoE. Be careful, this proximity AoE can either spawn immediately or spawn later, so keep paying attention for the animation. Then the boss is going to use Aurora Cannon, which is a line AoE. You're going to be baiting that on 2, and the moment he casts it, you immediately go to 3, which is northeast. Now you're going to wait over here. The proximity AoE will go off now, and the boss will come to you. You're going to stay there until the boss casts his puddle on your location. You dodge by simply just going behind him, and the puddles around the arena will all slowly disappear. After this, the boss will cast a melee ranged AoE and then repeat the phase. Now, as mentioned before, the 3rd pattern is the melee uptime pattern. The entire east side is free of orbs, so you can keep the boss at 1, stay there yourself as well, keep the DPSing the boss over there, and the moment he casts Aurora Cannon, you just go to your safe spot to avoid the proximity AoE. I also mentioned before that the proximity AoE can spawn in many different ways, and there's something called the bugged meteor. The bugged meteor is when the meteor animation doesn't spawn at all and it just almost seemingly instantly drops on the ground. This is incredibly dangerous, so to avoid this is to always move at the same speed with a mindset to always avoid the incredibly fast invisible meteor. Now here in the last POV you can see the meteor spawn incredibly fast, and this is pretty much the bugged meteor, but now at least we can see the enemy. One last thing to mention is that every job can fight this boss without commanders. Even Black Mage has quite a comfortable time fighting him, so as long as you play safe, you'll be fine. But your kill time is heavily dependent on how aggressive and greedy you play. Now we have finally arrived at the final set. We immediately start off with one of the easiest mobs of the set, the White Mage, and also one of the only mobs you can fight without commanders on DPS in a comfortable way. All this mob does is cast stone. He doesn't do any auto attacks, all you have to do is line of sight this stone. And just like with the tofu, the trick to line of sighting this is the moment you see the cast, that's when you hide behind the wall. Again, just be careful to not peek out too fast, otherwise you will still get hit by the attack. Here's a POV of me fighting multiple White Mages on stage. There's one thing to mention that does happen if you fight more than 2 mobs, while the White Mage also in the fight. They will cast Cure 2. Cure 2 will use them up, but only for 2-3k, so this is incredibly insignificant. On top of that, White Mages, even in a multiple or in a solo pull, will also cast Stone Skin, which puts like a 5% damage shield on the mobs, and you can just completely ignore this and use this to your advantage to damage them. Here we have the Monk mob, an incredibly difficult mob to fight without commanders on anything that isn't a tank. He starts off the fight with a foot ward cast, which gives him a haste buff, but you can stun this, or you can use arm's length to negate the haste buff that he gets. Then he will cast Featherfoot, which gives him a 4-second evade buff, so while this is up, I recommend you just run away, kite him a little bit, and avoid as much auto attack damage as possible. Now here comes part why this mob is so dangerous. He's going to put a 15-second dot on you that hurts quite badly per tick. Then he's going to hit you with 3 triple hits, so hits of 3 triple hits. And this will hit you for around 1 to 1.2k per hit, and you will get hit by auto attacks, so you get hit by triple hits, the dot, and auto attacks all at the same time. The safest and best way to deal with him is the moment you get the dot on you, you start kiting him with sprint on until the dot is gone. Then you go back in and pop your mitigations to tank the triple hits and auto attacks. And soon after that, he will repeat his rotation. So the way to go about this fight is to burst him as much as possible before he gets the first feather food. After that, you kite him as much as possible while the dot is on, and then you fight him again once the dot is gone. Then, after he repeats his rotation, you want to make sure he's dead before you start using the second rotation of triple hits again. However, as mentioned before, this mob is incredibly difficult and a lot of experienced runners don't even fight him without commanders. So do recommend just using a steel or second fealty until you do get used to fighting him and have enough experience to fight him without commanders. Meanwhile, on ranged DPS is quite easy, all you have to use is just your heavy and sprint. Now if you do take too much damage, you can always snare him and just let him just stand still for like 10 whole seconds. Casters usually are the most vulnerable on Cassis mob, and you really have no tools to fight against them. No stun, no slow, no snare. So it's either you die or he dies. Especially on Summoner and Black Mage you have no tools at all but to kite. At least on Red Mage you can spam for a cure, and on Red Mage it is a little bit more comfortable fighting him. Here we have the warrior mob. You need to avoid fighting this. It is a side mob, so you for sure can, and only in very rare case are you forced to fight him. This mob is incredibly dangerous and I highly recommend you avoid fighting this. This mob is so dangerous that you can only fight him without commanders on tanks, and even then it is still incredibly difficult and avoided to do so, and people will still use a steel to fight this mob on tank. However, I will show you a POV soon of me fighting him on Dancer without the steel, and it is technically possible on paper to fight him on ranged DPS without commanders. That said, let's talk about his mechanics. He makes use of double auto attacks. Now after the first double auto attack, around 5 seconds after that, he will use 3 dashes onto you, which will knock you back, damage you, and he will continue auto attacking you while doing those dashes. So a good thing is to use arm's length a little bit after the first double auto attack. Then he will use another double auto attack, and then either one more, or he will start using Raging Rush. Raging Rush is a massive tank buster which hits you really hard and can one-shot anyone without steel except for tanks. A fun little trick you can do on high burst jobs, especially Summoner, with strength and fealty, and all your bursts you can kill him within 15 seconds. As mentioned before, here is Raging Rush critting through steel while a Scholar Shield is up, and you can see I'm still almost dying. And as mentioned before, here's a POV of me fighting the warrior on Dance without steel but with a strength, and this is one of those moments where I would just say don't try this at home. It is completely unnecessary, it's incredibly dangerous, don't do this. It's just for a fun challenge. Here we have the Ghost Patrol, one of the hardest mobs in all of Helveson High to do without Commander. With really good play and good mitigation usage, you can always consistently fight this mob without Commanders. Now let's get into his mechanics. He starts off with an on-aggro dash attack, which obviously you have to LOS. And then 4 or 5 seconds into the play, he will hit you with a double auto attack, which you can line of sight. Just like with the Go mob, you just need to know when he's going to use a double auto attack. There's no indicate of when he's going to do it, so you just need to know when. So 5 seconds after the pull, he's going to do his double auto attacks, line of sighted, and then he's going to do a swipe, which is a non-telegraph frontal cleave. Then he's going to do another double auto attack, which you can line of sight, and then he's going to use swing, which is a massive AoE around him, which you can also line of sight. Immediately after that, he's going to do another double auto attack, and then he's going to use swipe again, and then he's going to use another double auto attack. After the 4 double auto attack, or more so after the second swipe, he's not going to do anything but auto attack you for 5 seconds. During this period, you have to use your mitigations or kite him, and then depending on how long you have kited him, he's either going to use another double auto attack or he's just going into his swing animation again, and then he's going to repeat the whole process again. So do keep those in mind, and if you do mess one of these up, just pray you don't get crit, otherwise you will die. I do highly recommend that you do use a steal on anything that is not a tank job. It is incredibly difficult to build this up, it requires quite a bit of experience, and it is not even common knowledge that you can do this without commanders. It's only been recently discovered by myself that this is possible, and not many people are able to pull this off yet. However, it is not needed to fight this mob without commanders. It will just help you immensely by saving your steal for more difficult situations later on. Now here are some POVs of me fighting him on every DPS class and on a tank job. One thing to mention to avoid confusion, the damage you see me getting to the wall are auto attacks. Auto attacks go through walls if you are in range. The attack that I'm dodging is the swing, and in some of my POVs you will see me getting hit by the swing. Now there's one thing I've not mentioned yet in this guide. Now when you aggro mob on stairs, he will not do his on-aggro dash attack, instead he will come moving towards you, and then he will use his on-aggro dash attack, which will make it incredibly dangerous, and the LOS will most likely fail. This is because aggro works on the same level, not on height when there's a height difference. So when there's a height difference, he cannot start his on-aggro dash attack. So you really want to avoid aggroing mobs on stairs. And here's a fun little POV of me fighting 2 Gozus at the same time on the worst DPS job, Black Mage with Steel in Bloom, no abilities. Here we have Team Funimob. He is incredibly dangerous. Only on tank do I recommend fighting him, and on all other jobs, only fight him with a Steel or Strength and Frailty and a lot of burst. Even on tank, he is quite dangerous, and only fight him if you're comfortable fighting him without Steel. You do need a lot of good mitigation to be able to fight him. Now to talk about what he does. All he does is just auto attacks, which hit you from really far. Like, their range is ridiculous. So even on a range job, he will get hit from miles away. And occasionally he will cast Fall Forward, which is a targeted line AoE, which you can only dodge by line of sighting it. Otherwise, if you do get hit by it, he will do massive damage to you, and also hit you with an auto attack, which will most likely one shot you even with a Steel on. And here's another fun POV of someone just leading this mob in strength and frailty. Here we have the Mimic of the Floor 91 Plus set. Only fight this with Steel on non-tank jobs, and then even on tank you do need to be very careful and need to use good mitigation to be able to fight him. Do be very careful when you do witching, and this counts for other mobs in this set, because if it does become an imp, it will still deal massive damage and you will most likely still force to Steel on. Here we have the Yaki mob. He is a pretty dangerous mob. He makes use of ranged double auto attack, so do be careful of that. And soon into the play he will cast Cherubisk. This will put your HP to 1. You can interrupt this, stun, or line of sight. It is possible to fight this mob without Pomanders on Red Mage and ranged DPS, and especially on tank of course. But I do not recommend, and I will still say just steal it up as anything that is not a tank. Here we have one of the scariest mob of the set, the Jimba mob. He makes use of double auto attacks, then he will use an I look away mechanic, and then he will give himself a damage stacking up buff. After the damage above, he will cast Elegant Meteor. This is an incredibly long cast, and it will drop on the location you were at the start of the cast, so it will snapshot you the moment the cast has started. So you need to line of sight the location you were at the start of the cast to avoid this meteor, otherwise you will die. After that, he will continue to buff himself up until either you or he dies. One thing to mention is that his double auto attack, which is called Hard Thrust, will go through space and time, and doesn't matter where you're at, he will still hit you with his double auto attack, so you can just consider it a ranged double auto attack. Of course, I only recommend fighting him only on tank without commanders, and on healer you have to use strength and steel because of his stacking buff. The longer the fight goes on, the more dangerous he becomes. And on DPS, it's a must to steal up. However, here's a POV of me fighting him on red mage without commanders, although this is again more of a challenge thing and something I would not recommend risking. As you can see in this PvP, if you do get double auto attack to crit it, or even if one of them crits, you can get one-shotted.
What the hell am I doing? Wait. Oh!
And here's one last POV of me even fighting him on red mage under Gloom and HP down with a strength and stuff. Here we have the Kubi Night Patrol, which is considered the most dangerous mob out of all Heavens on High. Only fight this on tank with steel and strength. Do not fight this on any other job, only strength and steel on tank. Unless you are forced to do so, then it is possible to fight them on healers and DPS with strength and steel as well, but it is still incredibly dangerous, so I do recommend using a witching in between. However, here's a POV of me fighting him on tank without commanders. So the mechanics he does is he gives himself a lifesteal buff, which is, well, as it says, he lifesteals you with every attack he does. He makes use of double auto attack, and the double auto attack is a cleave, so you can line of sight this. Then he will use a bottle on you, and then he will continue to give himself a stacking damage buff over time. Again, just like the Chimba, the longer this fight goes on, the more dangerous he becomes. Eventually, he will enrage, but you can interrupt or line of sight this. And here's a POV of me fighting him on machines with strength and steel. As long as you have enough kiting room, you will be fine. And on other jobs, you really need all your burst, all your mitigation, even his strength and steel to be able to fight him. In short, just avoid him, wipe the floors he spawns on, and just entirely never deal with him. Here we have the Kyo's, one of the very few mobs of this set that are very easy to pick up for every job. While in combat, he makes use of a cast called Cast, which is just him throwing a powder at you. Be careful, the cast is a bit fast. And he will cast Vital Plumage. Now, you can interrupt, stun, and cancel it out with Sleep. Otherwise, you will gain a 15-second defense buff, which will reduce damage by quite a bit. Be careful if you do multiple this mob in a bigger pool. The Vital Plumage cast is an AoE defense buff, so do be careful of that, because all the mobs around it will get a 15-second defense buff. Fun fact, if you fight this mob under Gloom and you allow him to use Vital Plumage, after the defense buff of Vital Plumage has worn off, the defense buff of Gloom will also disappear from the mob entirely. Before I forget to mention, out of combat, the Kyoza will shoot Gust at you, and just like the Raichu mob between the floor 51 and 60 set, he will go out of his room and go after you until you are inside of him for him to cast Gust. Here we have the Tenma Patrol. He can be done on DPS without advantage, however it is quite risky, as if he does double auto attack crit you, you will die. However, unlike the Ryujin and Enko, he does use a lot of cast, so that gives you a lot of room to heal up and damage him. Now let's talk about its mechanics. It makes use of double auto attacks. He will either do 1 or 2 depending on how long you kite him. Then he will use a non-telegraph frontal line AoE. And then will do a cast called Nicker. This is one of the only AoEs in Heavens on High that you cannot line of sight. However, you can stun and interrupt this, but you cannot line of sight it, so make 100% sure you do get out of range. After that, it will use another double auto attack, and then it will do another non-telegraphed line AoE, and then it will repeat its rotation. After this POV, I will also showcase fighting him without commanders on Reaper. And here's a little clip where I do get crit and die. Here we have the Senki mob, one of the easy mobs of the final few floors. What he does is he makes use of a casted frontal cleave, and then he will do a ranged double auto attack. And he will only always do this after the frontal cleave. So since you know this, you can always start mitigating or kiting right after the cleave cast. Here we have the Shabti, which is the easiest mob of this entire set. So all he does is just auto attacks and cast a line AoE, which is called Death's Door. The cast is incredibly fast, and as the name suggests, you will get one shot it. So the best way of dealing with this is just keep spinning around him so you automatically dodge the line AoE. Do be very careful with animation lock-like abilities, because they do lock you into place and leave you unable to dodge the Death's Door unless you know the timings that you are free to use them. Same goes for commanders, these will also animation lock you. Otherwise this can lead your run to a very unfortunate ending, just like in this clip over here. Here we have the, so to say, last mob of this set. He makes use of double auto attacks, which you can line of sight. So let's start talking about his reputation. He begins with using a cast called Void Trap. He's not going to use double auto attacks yet. He first starts with this cast, Void Trap, which is him just casting a puddle onto your location. And immediately after that, he will always use his double auto attack. So after Void Trap, you can immediately go into a line of sight spot to LOS this. Then he will use 2 auto attacks, or so to say around 5 to 6 seconds. Then he will use another double auto attack and then reset his rotation. The mob can be quite easily fought without commanders on tanks, healers and range jobs. However, on melee DPS, I do highly recommend you do abuse the line of sight, otherwise he will become a very difficult mob to fight. Here we have the very rare Dodo Patrol mob, which only spawns in the final set, and even then it doesn't always spawn. My biggest tip is to just entirely avoid him and never fight him. He wastes a lot of time and he's quite strong. And if you do really have to fight him, use strength and steel, or just use a witching on him. Here I have a POV of me fighting him without commanders on warrior. He will double auto attack you for around 2 to 3 times, and then he will use foul stench, which will push you to sleep for 10 seconds. During this 10-second sleep duration, he will cast Turret, which will give him a 30-second haste buff, and then he will continue his cycle of packs, and then he will use foul stench against Turret, and so on. You can stun him, and you can also negate the haste buff with slow. However, even if I do tell you to avoid fighting him, I do recommend taking a picture of him, because the entire Deep Dungeon community does really love him, and we all get very happy whenever we do get to see him. And lastly, of course, here we have some big pulls you can do on healer. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope this guide helps you get your clear, and if you do need to get more info, there's always my written guide that you can find in the description below. Good luck!
Yo, come on! Come on! Come on! Ah! Of strength! Sprint! Run! Come on, load faster! Yeah, I want to press the sprint, dude. Sprint! Go! Go, sprint! Ah! Go, 5! I'm not making it. No, there's no way. No, I'm not making that. Yes!